Hello and welcome to the President's Podcast right here on the record with the Ohio Senate. The views the news excludes. I'm your host, the Director of Communication for the Republican Caucus in the Senate, the Majority Caucus. I'm John Fortney. Back this week, the President of the Ohio Senate, Matt Huffman, from Lima, Ohio. Welcome back. Good to see you.
Thanks for coming to Lima, John.
Well, busy week there last week with the two state issues, Issue 1 and Issue 2. Basically, 25 of the 88 counties decided the election. Big turnout in the metropolitan areas. And we'll start with Issue 1, get your reaction on Issue 1. And one thing that really drove a lot of reaction, not only in the media by the State House Press Corps, but also on social media, was the last half of your statement on election night. And I'm just going to go ahead and read that briefly, where you said, "This isn't the end. It really is just the beginning of a revolving door of ballot campaigns to repeal or replace Issue 1. What that didn't say was that the legislature will begin a revolving door of ballot campaigns to repeal or replace Issue 1. It was really a reference back to your comments in summertime about a Constitution that's an easy target at a 50+1 majority.
Yeah, I mean, for years we've had discussions, and these are on both sides of the aisle, folks who are interested in government, about how easy it is to amend the Ohio Constitution. I get to meet with other legislators, and some of them were surprised that it's merely a 50% plus one standard in Ohio, because most states there's some other higher standard. Of course, the U.S. Constitution is 75% of the states. So there is a spot where 70% of Ohioans agree on even a controversial issue like abortion, and most other issues that we deal with. And my concern is, because this abortion proposal is so radically to the left, that what will happen, I think, is there will be a number of tragedies that occur, and those will become public, and people will say, well, we should at least not allow that. And that will be a constitutional amendment. Probably sometime in the future, there'll be an amendment regarding banning partial birth abortion in Ohio, which I think a large majority of Ohioans would support. So now, whether that's the legislature or other groups that put that on the ballot, who can say? But that's the problem. And if something like this, in any situation, whether it's abortion or anything, if the current status of the law, the Constitution, is so far to one end of the spectrum or another, people are going to go to the ballot. And it's not going to happen right away, but when the horror stories emerge, it's going to happen.
But to be clear, the Ohio General Assembly, at least from the upper chamber, and the Ohio Senate, there's not going to be a resolution to put before the voters, passed out of the Senate, to repeal Issue 1 or Issue 2 for that matter this coming year.
Yeah, certainly not in 2024. And on the Issue 2, which we can get to, that's something the legislature, because it's an enacted statute, the legislature doesn't go to the ballot on that. As it relates to Issue 1, these things are harder to put together than I think most people imagine. The Issue 1 proponents started essentially after the Dobbs decision. So this was a campaign that was 16 months in the making.
$35 million.
$35 million. Some of that, of course, we know coming out of folks in Switzerland and Washington and New York and things like that. And the one of the reporters looked at me and said, well, since you said you're going to put this on the ballot in March of 2024, and I said, well, I've never said that. And she looked at me and said, well, someone said you said it. So, it's
double sourcing.
Yeah, well, I'm not sure why anybody wouldn't just ask me, which
Right.
they did. And I think there's certainly not time to put something on the ballot in 2024 or run an effective campaign. And I don't think that the public, unfortunately, with a lot of these important issues, in order to get the public's attention, there has to be tragedies. And, we pass a lot of legislation. Terrible thing happens, and we say, hey, let's increase the penalties for that. Let's create another set of crimes. And there are going to be tragedies as a result of this abortion amendment that was passed. And that's when the public can say, oh, okay, well, when I voted to do this, I wasn't voting for that. We need to change that. So, we'll see how it progresses.
Yeah, one of the maybe a final comment on issue one. If you read the Attorney General's analysis of issue one on the Attorney General's website, it was very eye-opening when we talked with Senator Reynolds and went point by point why it does allow abortion on demand based on an undefined definition for health. And there are a lot of issues within that. And maybe even we'll see some of the points within issue one challenged in court.
Yeah, as as I mentioned, both with the marijuana and the abortion, Ohioans, well, I should say Americans, and America is a unique country because the way it was formed, basically formed on we don't want the king telling us what to do, and that attitude has been prevalent for the entirety of our country. And by and large, the government has stayed out of people's lives. If you didn't like what was going on in New York, you went to Pennsylvania, and then you moved to Ohio, and then you went to Iowa, and once upon a time, California was the freest state in the nation because it was all new people not wanting to be told what to do by the government. And that's really how I look at both of these, is essentially the central point is we don't want the government telling us what to do. We don't want to tell them whether we can smoke pot or when we can get an abortion. Americans don't want the government telling them when they can own a gun, and they don't want to tell them how they should educate their kids. Now, Americans also want the protections of government, and that's really the fine line that governments have to find. And it's, and that's why generally it's better to have these things sorted out in the legislature where it can change as public opinion change. You put it in the Constitution. Well, now you've done something that is difficult to undo, and unfortunately, as I said, the tragedies that are going to occur, that are going to become public as a result of this, will have to occur to get the public's attention to change it.
There are some things, because issue two is an initiated statute that was passed by the voters, that can change because it basically becomes Ohio Revised Code.
Right.
Correct. And there are some glaring issues within the actual amendment. If you didn't have a chance to read it, one thing that really stood out when I was reading it, was section 21, which talks about the level of THC, or the active ingredient that gives people the high from smoking marijuana. The industry, I like to call them the cartels, but the industry wrote it that the amount shall be no less than 35%, and then called that a cap. Actually, the language should be, if it's a cap, no more than 35%. So there's 10 to 15 issues that you want the General Assembly, starting in the Senate, to really address within this amendment.
Yeah. And as I've mentioned a couple people before, when people go to vote on candidates or issues, they're not necessarily, you get to vote yes or no, or for somebody or for the other candidate. You don't get to say, well, I'm putting 60% on this guy and 40, or hey, I'm going to check of these, dozens of things that are in here, I'm only voting for this, this, and this. The issue before the voters was, are we going to legalize marijuana or not? Now, did the voters, for example, know that there was going to be a preference for licenses to people who had formerly been convicted for selling drugs illegally? Probably not very many people thought of that. And if you had a vote just on that, well, it would probably be 70 or 80% against. But it's hard to go through and source all that, especially with the din that is created with campaigns and this side saying this side saying
People
that.
tend to vote on a general feeling.
Sure.
Maybe not read every single word of the amendment.
Right, just like they do on candidates. I like this candidate even though I don't like him on a particular issue. Generally, I like him, or they vote, for a whole variety of reasons. So it's important for folks to go through here and look to see what changes are going to be made, which we think the public generally wants. I really need to give credit to Governor DeWine, both for his passion on issue one and how hard he worked. It was a pretty remarkable effort on his part. Obviously, we were on the losing side of that. But he's also very passionate about making sure that if we're going to sell marijuana in the state of Ohio, there needs to be some protection for the public, just like we regulate alcohol, the sale of a whole variety of drugs and things like that, opiates and all of that. So, the governor called me, 9 o'clock in the morning on November 8th and said, we need to talk about this marijuana thing. And since that time, we've met, my staff in the Senate has met with the governor's folks. And we have Senator McCauley, who's an attorney, and Senator Steve Huffman, who's the doctor who has been working on the medical marijuana issue. And there's been a suggestion perhaps that the medical marijuana system that we can be used as a template, if you will, for this overall sale. There's some complexities with that. For example, you don't pay sales tax on medicine, but you do on other items. So if you're buying it as a medicine, you're not going to pay a tax. So how does that work if it's this point of sale that's the same? Can you use marijuana publicly?
Indoor smoking laws.
Yeah, well, right, and we right now are in this strange place where if you cannot smoke tobacco, but you can use marijuana if the local entity says it's okay. Well, there are going to be a lot of places that say you can't use marijuana here, and there are going to be a lot of places that say you can. Well, how's the public protected about that? Most people don't want their children walking through a haze of marijuana smoke. It's incredible that I'm actually having to say this publicly, but so we just need to get all of that figured out,
including sending some of the tax money back to the people that are running the industry.
Yeah, this was if all retailers could get this deal,
that's a sweetheart deal.
Yeah. So what was in this, and you try to tell people, but it gets lost in the shouting, that when a consumer pays the tax, a portion of the tax goes back to the guy who sold them the marijuana. That's how the moneymakers set this up so that they could make more money, and that's obviously ludicrous. If you go buy, a television, if the store that sold you the television was going to get some of the sales tax that you paid, I mean, it's not. So that, I think that needs to change how we're going to spend the money. There are other ways to spend the money. They have something called the Social Equity Fund, and it's a little unclear exactly what that is. And the money that's going to be generated by this, a lot of folks have ideas about how to spend that. We always have lots of ideas about how to spend money. We've had this conundrum regarding the police and fire pension fund and the PTSD as an additional benefit for the police and fire. But the municipalities don't want to pay on their share of it, or it's a huge expense. They, of course, care about their police and fire, for people listening. But it's been suggested that could help supplement the municipalities. And then, we've had people the governor's talked about law enforcement training. The mental health, local mental health agencies are going to have a lot more work. We know that marijuana contributes to mental illness, especially in younger people. So should the money be used for the local mental health agencies to deal with that onslaught? So there's a lot of good uses, I think, for it.
Yeah, within the language of the Issue 2 statute, the amendment that passed, I believe it directed 25% of all the revenue to mental health and addiction programs. And I had said on an earlier show that if I told you you'd spend 25% of your family's budget on mental health services and addiction programs, you'd say, what happened to my family? So there's going to be some heavy scrutiny about exactly how this program should be run. Where will it land? How will that get done? I would assume there'll be a set of hearings in the Senate and a Senate committee in the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, we can change statutes. The legislature can change a statute, and the governor can sign the bill or veto it. We all know the process to do that. There is a concern when we go to change things if we remove rights that people have. Is the change enforceable? And but of course, the revised code is being changed all of the time. That's why we call it revised, because it's being revised. If what we don't want to do is have this program exist for a while, people depend on it, and or they think this is the way it's going to be, and then we change it. So what we'd like to do is change it prior to the December 7th enactment date. And that's unfortunate that, this also said this goes into effect 30 days after the election, which folks will know that by and large legislation doesn't take effect until 90 days after a governor signs it. So it's usually over 3 months. And not the 30 days. Well, that was part of the folks who drafted it is hurry up and make it happen so, it can't change. I don't think anybody was thinking about that when they voted for it. So we would like to do that so that the program doesn't get going and people start doing things. And that's why we'd like to do it by December 6th. And this is what Governor DeWine has suggested and asked us to do. Now, in fact, we didn't know this was going to pass or not. A lot of people said it was going to pass. Our staff in the Senate began working on potential changes, this fall. And so a lot of this work has been done. But my expectation is that we're going to have something on the floor for the House to concur on December 6th. Now, this is going to be a process it's going to be happen more quickly than it usually does. I've met with the minority leader in the Senate, asked for her input. We'd like to hear input from the House. I've actually received a number of messages from House members suggesting that, hey, here's a change, you ought to do it this way instead of that way. And so we'd like to have a product that the House can concur on December, and of course we're going to work with the governors too.
Committee and General Government.
Yeah, so the General Government Committee, and the reason we put it in that committee is that's also the committee that was considering the changes to the medical marijuana program, and that's Senate Bill 9. So we'll probably put it in a House bill that will allow the House to concur if they choose to do that on the 6th. And they're going to have hearings in probably the first part of December. There'll probably be some more informal hearings before that.
And you'll be able to find a schedule of those hearings in the General Government Committee on ohiosenate.gov. You just click on committees and you can find the schedule. Let me move on to this also deals with elections and election law. But there is now a lawsuit that challenges the partisan party label on certain judicial races. The legislature passed a bill and it was signed into law. I think it started even in the Senate, if I'm correct, that would attach the party label of a judicial candidate for Supreme Court or appeals courts. And now that's being challenged. Your thoughts about that?
Yeah, so the reason it's important, voters would like to have information about candidates. And some voters, of course, as we know, they go and do research and they listen to speeches, they do all of that. And some voters don't. Some voters show up and they say, okay, I'm looking at the ballot, I know that name, I don't know that name. But in every case, the one fact that is most important to voters is party affiliation. And it's pretty simple to understand that not all Republicans obviously agree on every issue with other Republicans, and the same is true in the Democratic Party. But generally, if you know a person's party affiliation, you know something about them, that they're more likely to think about this issue the way that you want to do that. So what we saw, and other states did this too before us, when we put party affiliation on the ballot, the number of people participating in the election rose dramatically. And of course, what that means is people get down there, they get to the Supreme Court, or they get the Court of Appeals, and they say, I don't really know either one of these people. I'm just not going to vote.
They don't vote.
So they just don't vote. And, having people participated is a good thing, right? So people participate in the election. And the other thing that kind of gets thrown by the wayside here is it's very difficult there are limitations on the amount of money that can be contributed to a judicial campaign. And of course, that's how most candidates get the word out. By television, they do that. So judges can't raise as much money. They are not, I think a lot of folks in the public don't know until they get to the ballot that there is a Supreme Court race. Court of Appeals, even harder. For example, here in where the district we're in, 17 county district in the 3rd District Court of Appeals. Well, people will know, they know who Matt Staley or Jeff Reed is in Allen County, but they may not know them over in Crawford County or Union or Williams County or lots of other places. Well, I think Williams is in a different district. But the point is, these are districts that are very difficult to get your name out, and also very difficult to raise money to do that. So again, the party affiliation is helpful for these folks. I understand that there's a challenge to that, but my view of that is the voters want to know what is your party affiliation, and we think it was a good change. It turned out to do exactly what we thought it would.
And when you walk in to your polling place, you would like to walk out thinking that you were able to vote on every single race, whether it's an issue, and that you knew exactly what you were voting for and who you were voting for and why.
Sure. And again, party affiliation is the one thing that informs the voters the most.
Let me move on. The Department of Education and Workforce is the new revised Department of Education, the blend and the reform of the Department of Education to really bring accountability to the department. And a new nominee to be the director of the department, Steve Dakin, was proposed, put before the Senate by the governor. Brief thoughts about how that works, your thoughts of Steve Dakin. And the Senate has advise and consent authority to approve nominations. A little explanation about how we take that seriously.
Yeah, you see sometimes sort of dramatic hearings in Washington, Supreme Court nominees and things like that. Well, the Ohio Senate has that authority over governor's appointments. Most folks don't know that there are thousands of appointments the governor makes during his term. And the advice and consent authority of the Ohio Senate is different than the U.S. Senate in most cases, because the person begins to serve, and they can continue to serve even if the Senate hasn't consented. Now, if we do consent, then they're consented for the entirety of the term, or of course we can object to that. Now, usually we have that worked out beforehand if there's going to be a question about somebody. Not always. Sometimes we have good discussions with the governor about that. This appointment is different. The way the statute was set up when we transferred the authority of this department from the state school board to the governor's office was that this person had to be proactively approved by the Senate within a time period, as do the two assistant superintendents. So it's important that we sort of get it right, that the governor has conversations with us, and we have. So I'm delighted with Steve Dakin as the governor's choice for this. He's really he was former public school superintendent at Reynoldsburg, has a great resume, has shown himself to be just a real intellectual and a person also who is willing to look at new ideas and do things differently. And that's that's in my mind has been a substantial problem with the folks at the ODE. Is there was no new idea that they they didn't dislike, and
And they didn't answer to the legislature,
well, right, and
nor to the governor, for that
yeah,
matter.
or the governor, and frankly to the local school folks. I mean, they obviously many of the folks at the ODE were anti-school choice, and they tried to keep those programs from going forward, but not getting information. And I would get a lot of complaints from private schools and charter schools. But I got as many, if not more, complaints from public school superintendents saying, can't get our question answered. They've made some policy change that's we don't have the money to pay for, on and on. And there was no real accountability to these folks. Well, now there is going to be, not just the governor, but from the superintendent. And the superintendent, or director, I should say, is like the other directors, does care what the legislature thinks. And I will say that, by and large, the directors in Governor DeWine's administration, if, you need to talk to them, they come and talk to you about problems that they have. And obviously, we don't agree on everything. And the legislature makes the laws and the administration enforces them, as we all know from our civics class, right? But, there's always a lot of interplay between all of that. So, but I think Steve Dakin is going to be a great choice, and looking forward to confirming him. I think we're going to do that on December 6th. We have some, we do want to go through our normal, have him appear before the Education Committee, talk about things. And so I think he'll be great. I'm not just saying that because he's from Lima either. So.
Super. Well, one member that we're definitely going to miss from the Republican caucus is Senator Frank Hoagland, United States Navy SEAL, around 30 years in the Navy, and he announced his retirement from the Senate this past week. Just some thoughts about him as a colleague and really his legacy of service, not just to the people of Ohio, but to the country.
Yeah, let me just say this. Frank and I, along with Stephanie Kunze and Matt Dolan, were all elected together in 2016. So we're the grizzled veterans of this outfit, and of course we'll be exiting. Now just Stephanie and Matt, actually along with Bob Hackett, who is the dean of our caucus, got there before we did through an appointment. But we'll all be leaving at the end of 2024. Frank was the first of the changeover from Democrat elected representatives to Republicans, starting in 2016, which of course, as we know, when Donald Trump was elected. There was no expectation that Frank was going to win in 2016. Jefferson County, that Ohio River district, had been Democratic for 100 years. Well, he's got a resume that nobody else has as a Navy SEAL. And if he likes you and wants to share some of his history, which he has with me, it's really fascinating stuff. But he won that race when nobody thought he would win. Now, we know since then that Michael Rulli won in 2018 in Youngstown, and then Sandy O'Brien up in Ashtabula. And those three Senate seats, solidly Democratic, have really changed the valley, the Mahoning Valley and Ohio Valley.
Candidates, campaigns, and issues matter.
Right, yeah. And if a guy stands up and makes a speech and says, I'm a Navy SEAL, some people are going to vote for him just because of that, going back to why people vote. But Frank's legacy of service to the United States is really unmatched, as far as I know, in the Ohio General Assembly currently among current members. We've had some great veterans through the years, and we have other veterans currently in the Senate. But things that he's done, there isn't anybody. Having said all of that, he obviously cares passionately about veterans issues, about public safety. That's why he was chairman of that committee. And he's got a sense of humor that nobody else has in the Senate. And so did not serve in the U.S. military, but I have my dad and my brother and several other folks in my family. And when they start talking military jargon, I've been able to pick some of it through the years. And so when Frank would start into that in caucus, he'd always say to me after we got done talking, he'd always say, "Roger that, sir," which I take that as a great compliment. If somehow he thought, I was an officer or something, or at least that's how he related. So yeah, he's going to be missed greatly. The world's a dangerous place, more dangerous than it was a few months ago, and Frank has, as the folks in the movie say, a unique set of skills. And so those are going to be important to a lot of folks going forward.
And also moving forward, a screening committee for the Senate to review a replacement.
Yeah. So we will, when Frank decided he wanted to do this and it was the right time, we acted on it. We would like to seat his replacement by December 6th. So at least as far as session voting, that there's no interruption to the representation of the 30th Senate District. We put out a report or a notice to that, asked folks to submit their interest along with we have kind of an information form, and typically people will do these, they'll have endorsement letters, they'll have other things like that. I'm happy to say, since I've been Senate President, we haven't had to do this at all. When I was Speaker Pro Tem in the House and a Majority Leader over 4 years, we had about 16 or 17 of these for a variety of reasons. So this is the first one since I've been President. But we'll ask people to do that, and then we'll have some interviews, and we'll decide who that's going to be.
Ohio Senate President Matt Huffman, insightful as always. Thanks for your time today.
Thanks. Good talking to you, John.
Thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you soon.